My name is Joey Martinez, and I'm 72 years old. I built my construction company from nothing, working with these hands since I was 16. I thought I'd built something beautiful for my family, a legacy wrapped in love and sacrifice. But sometimes the people closest to you teach you the hardest lessons about respect. That Thanksgiving evening, I learned that blood doesn't always mean family, and family doesn't always mean blood. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about the people I'd spent my whole life providing for. Before I tell you what changed everything that night, let me know where you're watching from down in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe family respect should never be negotiable, and make sure to subscribe, because this story will show you how quiet strength can move mountains when loud voices fail. Sometimes the most powerful response is the one nobody sees coming. You want to understand what happened that Thanksgiving? Then you need to know who I was before that slap echoed through my dining room. I came to this country from Mexico when I was 8 years old, clutching my mother's hand as we crossed into Texas with nothing but hope and determination. My father died when I was 15, and I dropped out of school the next year to support my family. Construction was honest work, and these calloused hands became my ticket to the American dream. For 40 years, I built Martinez Construction from one beat-up truck into a company with 50 employees. Every nail I hammered, every foundation I poured, every paycheck I earned went toward creating something bigger than myself. I met Sarah at a church dance when I was 25. She was a teacher, spoke perfect English, and saw something in this rough construction worker that I couldn't see in myself. We married 6 months later. Sarah gave me 2 sons who became my whole world. Marcus arrived first, followed 4 years later by David. I worked 16-hour days to give them everything I never had. Private schools, college funds, family vacations to places I'd only dreamed of visiting. When Marcus graduated with his business degree, I was the proudest father in that auditorium. David chose education like his mother, becoming a high school teacher with a heart bigger than his paycheck. Marcus married Stephanie 3 years ago, and that's when the cracks started showing. She came from old East Coast money, the kind of family that pronounces martini like it's a religious word. Never worked a day in her life, but sure had opinions about how everyone else should live theirs. I paid for their wedding $60,000 for one day because I wanted my son happy. I bought them a house, put down $80,000 because family takes care of family. But Stephanie started changing things slowly. First, she'd correct my English at family dinners. Then came the comments about our ethnic food, how the house smelled too much like garlic and cumin. She'd roll her eyes when I told stories about building the business, like my struggles were somehow beneath her refined sensibilities. Marcus started making excuses why they couldn't come to Sunday dinners. Work was busy. Stephanie had commitments, always something. David married Elena 2 years ago, a quiet ceremony because they wanted simple. She's a teacher too, and they live in a small apartment they can afford on their salaries. But Elena listens when I tell stories. She asks questions about the old country, wants to learn Spanish, helps in the kitchen without being asked. That's the difference between someone who marries into a family and someone who becomes family. Sarah passed 5 years ago after fighting cancer with the same strength she brought to everything else. I held her hand in that hospital bed as she made me promise to keep the family together. "Joey," she whispered, "don't let money divide what love built." I thought I understood what she meant. I thought providing for everyone was the same as keeping us together. The warning signs were all there, but love makes you blind sometimes. Stephanie's disrespect grew bolder each month. She'd interrupt conversations, make snide comments about my accent, suggest I was getting confused when I'd tell the same story twice. Marcus would just smile that nervous smile and change the subject. Never defended me, never asked her to stop. I told myself he was caught in the middle, that marriage required compromise. But deep down, I knew something was breaking. You don't build a business by ignoring problems, and families aren't different from construction projects. When the foundation cracks, you better pay attention or the whole structure comes down. That Thanksgiving morning, I woke up at 5 a.m. like always. Couldn't sleep anyway, thinking about Sarah's empty chair at our dinner table. This was our first major holiday since her funeral, and I wanted everything perfect. I'd been planning for weeks, shopping for ingredients, calling my cousin Maria for Sarah's secret mole recipe. The turkey was 18 pounds, enough to feed an army, because that's how we always did holidays. By 9 a.m., the kitchen smelled like heaven, garlic and onions sautéing turkey in the oven, masa ready for tamales. I put on Sarah's old apron, the one that said, "Kiss the cook," in faded letters. Made me feel closer to her somehow, like she was watching over this meal that meant everything to me. David and Elena arrived early, arms full of side dishes and smiles that reached their eyes. Elena hugged me tight, said the house smelled like home. We worked together in the kitchen, laughing as David tried to flip tortillas and failed spectacularly. These were the moments that reminded me why family mattered more than money. Why all those years of hard work were worth every aching muscle and sleepless night. Marcus called at noon to say they'd be late. Stephanie had a hair appointment that ran over, then needed to stop by her mother's house to pick up some wine that cost more than most people's car payments. I bit my tongue, said we'd keep everything warm. Elena squeezed my shoulder, understanding passing between us without words. They finally walked through my door at 3 p.m., 2 hours after the time we'd agreed on. Stephanie swept in wearing a white coat that probably cost more than David makes in a month, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She air-kissed my cheek, her perfume so strong it cut through the smell of food I'd been cooking since dawn. "Oh my God, Joey," she announced to no one in particular. "Parking in this neighborhood is absolutely impossible. I had to walk 3 whole blocks in these shoes." She gestured to heels that could pay a month's rent, like the inconvenience was my personal failing. Marcus kissed my forehead, but his smile looked tired. "Sorry we're late, Dad. Traffic was murder." He avoided my eyes that tell I'd learned to read when he was 7 years old and breaking neighbors' windows with baseballs. We gathered around the dining room table I'd built with my own hands 30 years ago. Solid oak, big enough for 12 people because Sarah always said we needed room for the family we hoped to have. I'd carved our initials in one corner where no one could see a secret love letter embedded in furniture that would outlast us both. The conversation started pleasant enough. David talked about his students. Elena shared funny stories from her classroom. I told them about the new contract my company just landed renovating the old courthouse downtown. Pride filled my chest as I described the project, how we'd preserve the history while updating everything for the next century. That's when Stephanie's mask started slipping. "That's such an interesting perspective, Joey," she said, that slight pause before interesting, like she was choosing her words carefully. "I mean, it's just construction work, right? Not exactly rocket science." The table went quiet. Elena's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. David's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Neither did Marcus. He just stared at his plate like the turkey held secrets to the universe. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that started after Sarah died and got worse whenever I felt alone in a room full of people who shared my blood. "Well, mija," I said gently, "everything we're sitting on, everything you see around you came from that construction work. Sometimes the simplest jobs build the most important things." She bristled at mija, like the endearment burned her tongue by association. "Could you not call me that? It's not really my language." Marcus finally looked up, but instead of supporting his wife or defending his father, he just gave me a look that said, "Please don't make this difficult." Like I was the problem. Like showing love in the language that raised me was somehow embarrassing to the man I'd sacrificed everything to educate. The meal continued, but the warmth had leaked out of the room like air from a punctured tire. Stephanie criticized the seasoning, said next year maybe we could cater from somewhere more refined. She whispered to Marcus about my recent doctor visits, how I was getting forgetful and maybe shouldn't be living alone in such a big house. I heard every word. 72 doesn't mean deaf, and disrespect has a volume all its own. After dinner, I suggested we move to the living room for coffee and family photos, the tradition Sarah started when the boys were small. Every holiday ended the same way, with pictures that would become memories, proof that love had gathered us around the same table one more time. Stephanie checked her phone and sighed dramatically. "Actually, I need to leave soon. My book club is meeting at 7 and these women don't wait for anyone." "Book club on Thanksgiving?" I asked, genuinely confused. I thought we'd spend the evening together like always. Family tradition. Her laugh was sharp-cutting. "Just because you have nothing else to do doesn't mean we have to waste our whole day here, Joey." The words hit me like a physical blow. Waste our whole day. This meal I'd been preparing since dawn, this house I'd filled with love for 40 years, this time together that I'd been counting on since Sarah died. All of it waste. I stood up slowly, my bad knee protesting after hours of cooking. "Mija," I said quietly, "family time isn't wasted time. This house will be yours someday. These moments matter more than any book club." That's when her mask fell off completely. "Don't call me that," she exploded, her voice echoing off the walls I'd painted myself. And don't assume anything about your house. I didn't sign up for your little immigrant fantasy where everyone speaks Spanish and pretends your broken English is charming." The room went dead silent. Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David started to rise from his chair, anger flashing in his eyes. But Marcus, my firstborn son, the boy I'd carried on my shoulders through every parade and fair in this city, just sat there looking embarrassed by me. I felt something cold settle in my chest, different from the usual tightness. This was clarity, sharp and clean as a blade. "You're right about one thing, Stephanie. You didn't grow up in an immigrant family. You didn't grow up with the kind of love that builds all of this." I gestured around the room at the furniture I'd crafted, the walls covered with family photos, the life I'd constructed brick by brick with these hands that she found so distasteful. Her face twisted with rage. "Love you call this love? This house smells like a restaurant kitchen. You can barely speak proper English, and you act like we should be grateful for your charity. I have news for you, old man. Some of us have standards." That's when my son should have stood up. That's when Marcus should have defended the man who'd worked 2 jobs to pay for his college, who'd gone without vacations to buy him cars, who'd handed over $80,000 for a house down payment without asking for anything in return except respect. Instead, I heard something that broke my heart into pieces so small they could never be put back together. I heard Marcus laugh. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable chuckle. A real laugh, like his wife had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Dad," he said, still smiling, "you probably deserve that. Let's be honest, you can be a bit much sometimes. Maybe tone it down a little." The sound of Stephanie's hand hitting my cheek came sharp and sudden, echoing through the dining room like a gunshot. But the physical pain was nothing compared to watching my son's face light up with amusement, like watching his wife slap his 72-year-old father was entertainment. Elena's sob broke the silence. David was on his feet, immediately moving toward me, but I held up my hand to stop him. I touched my burning cheek, looked at the woman who'd just struck me, then at my son who thought it was funny. "Drive safely," I said quietly. "Family is precious." Stephanie grabbed her purse, satisfaction written across her face like she'd just won something important. Marcus followed her to the door, still avoiding my eyes, still choosing silence over courage. And that's when I knew. That's when 40 years of sacrifice crystallized into one moment of perfect understanding. I hadn't just been slapped by my daughter-in-law. I'd been shown exactly who my son really was. The front door closed with a sound like a coffin lid. David immediately moved to my side, Elena right behind him, both of them checking my face where Stephanie's hand had left its mark. But the red on my cheek would fade. The understanding in my heart would last forever. "Dad, I can't believe he just sat there," David said, his voice shaking with anger. "I can't believe Marcus laughed when that woman hit you." Elena brought ice wrapped in a kitchen towel, her teacher's instincts kicking in. But she was crying, tears streaming down her face as she gently pressed the cold compress to my cheek. "Joey, I'm so sorry. That was unforgivable." I let them fuss over me for a moment, grateful for their love, their outrage on my behalf. But inside I felt strangely calm, like a storm had been raging in my chest for months and finally passed, leaving behind clear skies and clean air. "You know what hurts most?" I said, settling into Sarah's favorite chair. "It wasn't the slap. It was seeing my son choose her laughter over his father's dignity." David and Elena stayed until midnight, making sure I was okay, helping me clean up the kitchen, putting away leftovers that suddenly seemed like monuments to foolishness. We didn't talk much, but their presence filled the holes that Marcus and Stephanie had torn in the evening. After they left, I walked through my house alone, seeing it with new eyes. Every family photo on the mantel told a story, but some of those stories had been lies. Pictures of Marcus's graduation, his wedding, family vacations where I'd paid for everything and thought his smile meant gratitude. Looking at them now, I saw what I'd missed before. Obligation masquerading as affection, tolerance disguised as love. In my bedroom, I pulled out the photo of Sarah and me on our wedding day. She was radiant in white. I was nervous in a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit, but we were real. Whatever else happened, what we had was real. "Sarah," I whispered to her picture, "you warned me about spoiling him. You said love without boundaries becomes entitlement. I should have listened." My chest felt tight, but not from heartbreak this time. From understanding. From a decision forming in my mind like a blueprint taking shape on an architect's table. I'd spent my whole life building things with my hands. Now it was time to build something different. I couldn't sleep, so I sat in the kitchen where I'd cooked that Thanksgiving feast with so much hope. The house still smelled like family dinner, but the family had walked out with a woman who thought respect was optional and a son who thought disrespect was amusing. Some bridges once burned light the way forward, and sitting there in the dark, I could see my path clearly for the first time in years. The slap hurt for an hour. The laughter would teach lessons that lasted a lifetime. Friday morning, I called my lawyer before the sun came up. Benjamin Carter had handled my legal affairs for 20 years, drawn up my will when Sarah got sick, helped me structure the business for maximum family benefit. Good man, honest lawyer, the kind who tells you what you need to hear instead of what you want to hear. Ben, I need to see you today. It's about my will. Joey, it's the day after Thanksgiving. Can't this wait until Monday? No, it can't. Some things don't wait for convenient timing. An hour later, I sat across from Ben and his oak-paneled office documents spread between us like evidence in a trial. My current will left 60% of everything to Marcus, 40% to David. Made sense at the time. Marcus was the businessman, had the family seemed positioned to handle the responsibility. Tell me what happened, Ben said after I explained why we were there. I told him everything. The months of disrespect, the dinner conversation, the slap that echoed through my dining room, and the laughter that cut deeper than any physical blow. Ben listened without interrupting, taking notes in his careful handwriting. You want to change the will because you're angry, he said when I finished. I understand that, but anger fades, Joey. Family is forever. This isn't anger, Ben. This is clarity. I'm 72 years old and I know the difference. We spent 3 hours restructuring everything. The house, the business, the investments, the life insurance. All of it redirected to David and Elena with specific provisions for a scholarship fund I wanted to establish. The Sarah Martinez Memorial Scholarship for first-generation college students. Kids like I used to be hungry for education and willing to work for it. What about Marcus? Ben asked. You're leaving him nothing. I'm leaving him exactly what he's earned. Nothing. Ben tried to talk me into a cooling-off period. Wait a month, he suggested. See if Marcus calls to apologize. Give him a chance to make this right. But I'd given Marcus 35 years of chances. I'd watched him choose Stephanie's contempt over his father's love again and again. Ben, you've got kids. If someone slapped your father and you laughed, what would happen next? He was quiet for a long moment. I'd probably lose my inheritance. Then you understand. The next week, I met with my accountant, Margaret Santos, who'd been doing my books since I could afford to have books done professionally. Sweet woman, grandmother of 6, always asked about my family with genuine interest. Joey, are you sure about this? She asked as we went through the financial restructuring. This is a lot of money to redirect. Margaret, let me ask you something. If you spent your whole life building something for your family and they treated you like an embarrassing burden, what would you do? She was quiet then, nodded slowly. I'd find a family that deserved it. Over the following weeks, I liquidated investments Marcus expected to inherit, moved money into accounts he didn't know existed, established the scholarship fund with $500,000 to start, every action deliberate, every decision final. The strangest part was how peaceful I felt. No anger, no bitterness, just the satisfaction of a carpenter who'd measured twice and cut once. I continued taking Marcus's phone calls, kept our conversations normal. He never asked about Thanksgiving, never mentioned the slap, acted like nothing had happened. That told me everything I needed to know. 3 weeks passed. No apology, no acknowledgement, no sign that my son understood he'd watched his wife humiliate his father and found it entertaining. But I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I was past that now, past hoping for something that would never come. Respect isn't inherited. It's earned. And some lessons can only be taught once. Christmas Eve, my phone rang. Marcus calling like nothing had changed, like we were still the same father and son we'd been before his wife's hand connected with my cheek and his laughter connected with my heartbreak. Dad, what time should we come over tomorrow? Stephanie made this amazing cranberry sauce she wants to bring. Amazing cranberry sauce from the woman who'd called my cooking ethnic and my home a waste of time. I almost laughed myself, but there was no humor in any of this anymore. Come whenever you want, son. Christmas is about family, right? Christmas morning, I prepared breakfast like always. Eggs, chorizo, fresh tortillas, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. David and Elena arrived early with gifts and genuine smiles. We exchanged presents in the living room where Sarah used to open every package like it contained treasure, no matter how small. I'd bought David and Elena a vacation to Hawaii, first-class flights, and a resort that would treat them like royalty. They deserved to see how beautiful the world could be when money wasn't a constant worry. Elena cried when she opened the envelope. David hugged me longer than usual. "Dad, this is too much," David said. "Son, it's exactly enough." Marcus and Stephanie arrived at noon, fashionably late as always. Stephanie swept in wearing a fur coat that probably cost more than most people's cars, carrying a designer purse that screamed money louder than any price tag. New jewelry sparkled on her wrists, around her neck and her ears. Everything paid for with money I'd given Marcus over the years. "Merry Christmas, Joey," she said, offering another air kiss that came nowhere near my face. The irony wasn't lost on me. She wouldn't call me dad, wouldn't show real affection, but had no problem spending money that came from the man she found so distasteful. We gathered around the tree, exchanging gifts with the forced cheer of actors who'd forgotten their motivation. Stephanie opened her presents with the bored efficiency of someone accustomed to expensive things. Marcus seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. "Dad," Marcus said during breakfast, "Stephanie and I were talking. We're thinking about buying a vacation home in Scottsdale. You know, somewhere we can all go to get away." All. Like the slap had never happened. Like the laughter that followed it was just background music to our happy family narrative. "Sounds expensive," I said mildly. "Well, we figured with your retirement planning and everything." His voice trailed off, the fishing expedition so obvious it was almost insulting. Stephanie picked up the thread. "Joey, you really should think about assisted living soon. This house is way too much for someone your age. All these stairs, this big yard. What if you fell and nobody found you for days?" Her concern was touching, especially coming from someone who'd made it clear that spending time here was a waste of her valuable day. Marcus nodded along. "Dad, we worry about you rattling around in this big place alone. Maybe it's time to start thinking about transitioning." Transitioning. Like I was a business being sold, not a man living in the home he'd built with his own hands. I felt that familiar calm settle over me, the same peace I'd found in Ben's office when I signed the new will. They weren't asking about my well-being. They were performing asset assessment, calculating timelines, planning their financial future around my death. "I have something to tell you both," I said quietly. The room went still. David and Elena, who'd been cleaning up wrapping paper, stopped moving. Marcus and Stephanie leaned forward, probably expecting news about my health, my plans, my willingness to cooperate with their vision of my twilight years. I pulled out the document I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket since Ben completed the paperwork. The new will, signed and notarized, legal and binding. I spread it on the coffee table Sarah had picked out 30 years ago. "This is my new will," I announced, "completed 3 weeks ago, the Friday after Thanksgiving." Marcus's face went white. Stephanie's eyes widened, then narrowed as she began to read the document that laid out exactly how much her disrespect had cost. "To my son Marcus," I read aloud, "who laughed when his wife disrespected his father, I leave the memory of every opportunity you had to choose differently and the knowledge that character matters more than comfort." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Stephanie's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. "Dad," Marcus finally whispered, "you can't be serious. This is about Thanksgiving, about one argument. Son, this is about watching you laugh when your wife slapped your father. This is about 35 years of love meeting 30 seconds of truth." That's when Stephanie's mask finally shattered completely. "You crazy old man," she screamed, jumping to her feet. "You can't do this. We'll fight it. Marcus is your son. You owe us, owe them." There it was, the truth that had been hiding behind every family dinner, every gift, every gesture of love I'd made. I owed them. My life's work wasn't a gift to be honored, it was a debt to be collected. Marcus looked torn between his wife's rage and some last vestige of love for his father. For a moment I hoped he might choose differently, might finally stand up for what was right. "Stephanie, calm down," he said weakly. But then he turned to me with eyes full of desperation rather than apology. "Dad, we can work this out. I know Thanksgiving got a little heated, but this is extreme." A little heated. That's what he called watching his wife slap his father. David and Elena had been silent through all of this, but now David stood up, his teacher's authority filling the room. Marcus, you watched your wife hit our father and you laughed. What exactly did you think would happen next? It wasn't that bad, Marcus protested. Dad's always been dramatic. You know how he gets. How I get. Expecting respect in my own home was now a character flaw. I looked at my oldest son, this man I'd sacrificed everything to raise, and said the words that needed saying. Your mother would be ashamed. The room erupted. Stephanie screaming about lawsuits and family obligations and ungrateful old men. Marcus trying to mediate between his wife's fury and his father's disappointment. David defending my decision while Elena quietly gathered up the gift wrapping like she could clean up the mess our family had become. Through it all, I sat in my chair feeling lighter than I had in years. The truth has weight when you carry it alone, but once you speak it out loud, it becomes someone else's burden. Marcus left with his wife, still trying to convince me I was making a mistake, still believing this was about money rather than respect, still not understanding that he'd lost more than an inheritance the day he chose laughter over love. 6 months have passed since that Christmas morning confrontation, and I can honestly say these have been the most peaceful months I've lived since Sarah died. The weight of pretending of hoping Marcus would somehow become the man I'd raised him to be lifted the moment I spoke the truth out loud. David and Elena moved into a house 3 blocks away, close enough for Sunday dinners, but far enough to have their own lives. Real Sunday dinners now, where conversation flows like wine and laughter comes from joy instead of cruelty. Elena has learned to make Sarah's mole, and it tastes almost as good as love should. Marcus called every few weeks at first, trying different approaches. Anger, bargaining, guilt, promises to make things right. I listened politely and responded with the kind of distant courtesy I'd show any stranger who'd wronged me. Because that's what he'd become. A stranger who happened to share my blood. The divorce papers came in April. Joey Martinez requesting dissolution of marriage and 50% of all assets acquired during their 3-year union. Apparently, when the money disappeared, so did her love. Marcus called me crying that night, finally understanding what kind of woman he'd defended over his father. Dad, I was wrong. I see it now. Stephanie only cared about what I could give her. Son, some lessons cost more than others. This one cost you everything. I helped him through the divorce, anyway, paid for a good lawyer, made sure he didn't get destroyed completely. Not because he deserved it, but because that's what love looks like even after trust dies. I wouldn't let Sarah's son become homeless, but I wouldn't pretend we were family again, either. The Sarah Martinez Memorial Scholarship awarded its first grants last month. 5 students, all first-generation Americans, all hungry for education and willing to work for it. I spoke at the ceremony, told them about coming to this country with nothing but hope about building something from scratch with determination and honest work. One young woman, Maria Elena Santos, reminded me so much of Sarah at that age. Bright eyes, quick smile, dreams bigger than her circumstances. She's studying engineering at Arizona State, wants to build bridges. I told her bridges connect people to possibilities, and she understood completely. Mr. Martinez, why did you choose to help students like us? Because you remind me who I used to be before I forgot that respect is earned, not inherited. My heart condition improved dramatically once the stress of pretending disappeared. Dr. Peterson says my blood pressure is better than it's been in years. Turns out, peace is excellent medicine, and authenticity heals more than any prescription. David and Elena are expecting their first child, a boy they're naming Joey after his grandfather. Elena jokes that she hopes he inherits my work ethic and her patience. I hope he inherits the wisdom to know the difference between love and manipulation, between family and obligation. Some of you watching this might think I was too harsh, that blood should forgive everything that family means, accepting disrespect for the sake of keeping peace. Others might say I waited too long, that I should have drawn boundaries years earlier. But here's what I learned in 72 years of living, 40 of them building something worth passing down. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. When family stops acting like family, sometimes the greatest gift you can give them is showing them what they lost. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's just expensive tolerance. I spent 40 years building wealth to leave behind. I spent one night learning the difference between legacy and inheritance. Legacy lives in hearts and actions. Inheritance sits in bank accounts until someone spends it on things that don't matter. My legacy isn't the money Marcus won't inherit. It's the young woman studying engineering who'll build bridges between dreams and reality. It's David and Elena raising their son to understand that respect isn't negotiable. It's the memory of a man who built something beautiful with his hands and refused to let disrespect tear it down. Every morning I wake up in the house I built, drink coffee in the kitchen where Sarah taught me that love means boundaries, and feel grateful for the clarity that comes when you stop pretending silence is the same as peace. The slap lasted a second. The laughter that followed taught me everything I needed to know about choosing family over blood, respect over obligation, truth over comfort. And you know what? I sleep better now than I have in years. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and demanding respect in your own family? Drop a comment below and share your story, because sometimes knowing we're not alone in these hard decisions makes all the difference. If this story touched your heart or taught you something about setting boundaries, hit that like button to let me know. Subscribe to this channel for more real stories about real life, because everyone deserves to hear that choosing self-respect over family obligation isn't selfish, it's necessary. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't measured by how much disrespect they're willing to tolerate. Thank you for listening to an old man's story about learning that love and respect must walk together, or neither can survive the journey. May your families be built on foundations strong enough to support truth, and may your boundaries be clear enough to protect the love that matters most. Take care of each other and remember that respect once lost is the hardest thing to rebuild. But self-respect once found is the strongest foundation you'll ever stand on.